afternoon and welcome to the second ever script meeting for BCH development. And today I'm going to introduce the individuals who are here for the meeting and ask them to give a little bit of an explanation of who they are and what they're doing. And I'm going to start with my top left and a gentleman named Tendo Pein. I'm sure I said it wrong and I apologize.
Okay, my real name is Bartłomiej Szypelow, but I'm better known as Tendo. I'm a developer of Spec, the smart contract language and compiler for building on BCH.
Excellent, thank you so much. Next on my list is Rosco Kalis.
Hi everyone, I'm Rosco Kalis and I'm developing CashScript, which is a language similar to Spec and also for smart contracts on Bitcoin.Cash.
Great, thank you Rosco. Amaury?
I'm Amaury Séchet, lead dev of Bitcoin ABC.
Thank you. Antony?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm Antony Zegers, also known as Mangarian online, and I work mostly on Bitcoin ABC related stuff.
Great. Thank you, Antony. Tobias?
I'm Tobias Ruck. I'm developer of b.cash and working for the Mitra protocol upgrade.
Great, thank you. And Jason?
Hey, I'm Jason Dreyzehner. I'm working on bitoff.com. It's a way of logging into websites and other signing applications with Bitcoin script.
Excellent, thank you so much. The agenda for today is going to be a discussion of the roadmap, and some discussion of op reverse bytes, Mitra, of course, and any other script-related topics that the participants wish to discuss. So we'll start off with the roadmap, and I think, Antony, you're going to give us an overview on that.
Sure. Yeah, so basically the reason I did this was because over time there's been various proposals to do different things in script, like add opcodes or do other things. And it's basically, when you look at each thing in isolation, it seemed sort of chaotic, and it was hard to figure out like where we're going with this whole thing. So basically the goal of this roadmap is to put some kind of overall goal and like structure to what's going on. So basically at this stage, I'm hoping to get people to just look at it and give feedback. I think the most important parts are just the beginning bits where it talks about like what we're trying to achieve, and then there's a list of criteria for like trying to look at evaluating various proposals to the script. Then after that, there's like I list various proposals and try to like apply those. But I mean the specifics of each proposal aren't the main thing. The main thing is trying to come up with what we think we should be, like what we think the goal should be for script. And yeah, so I guess that's the main thing. The other thing I should note, I guess, is that I'm mostly interested personally just in like incremental type stuff. So this roadmap is focused on that. It's not really talking about, like, it's not really this, like, it doesn't really cover stuff like what Tobias is going to talk about, which is like more, more kind of significant or major changes. So yeah, so like there's various like things that I can see that are feasible that might actually have a good chance of getting done. So I'm trying to like focus on like putting a framework around those. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I would just open discussion to like if anyone has any like comments on that or feedback. If anyone's looked at it, hopefully.
So yeah, I had a look at the Bitcoin.Cash roadmap, obviously. Yeah, like the most important things are like bigger integers, OP reverse bytes, which is already a bit under development, OP push state registers, or OP reverse roll, and the script size limit. And yeah, for bigger integers, I actually made a prototype implementation just to see how it works. using Boost, which is already integrated. I talked with Mark about it, and he was like, yeah, we probably won't want to use Boost for in the future because it's a dependency they want to remove. And yeah, I realized that's fairly simple to just make an integer, like larger integer implementation. The difficult part will probably be like testing that like there won't be a split and that it's like fully working. And I also did some benchmarking with the like larger integers with 128-bit integers, and it seems that they aren't the fastest. So if we take a 32 megabyte block full of like mul diff, then it can take up to 2 minutes to verify that if we don't use pay to script hash and just use like an empty input script. So we should be wary of that if we want to raise the integer limit, or we just say, okay, we're just going to use it for pay to script hash, because then the execution time for a whole block is just 17 seconds, or 32 seconds, which is like what we would expect from a block full of signatures. Anyone have any comments on those numbers or any like questions? Maybe that was a bit of information overflow.
Awesome, nice work. Did you put any of your scripts on GitHub or somewhere where we can?
Yeah, I can share the benchmark tool I wrote and the like my findings for the larger integer size.
Nice work.
And so you say we can maybe enable it for pay to script hash so that like the total time for execution is lower. What would the impact be of enabling that on, for instance, later in increasing the limits on pay to script hash? Did you think about that a bit, or do you have an idea?
Yeah, so that also ties like this part of the same problem. I think the only issue we should be concerned with for integers is execution time and obviously like consensus stuff. So increasing the opcode limit ties into that nicely. And there I also took empirical data, and there have been 2 quadratic behaviors known by a core developer. He figured out 2 ways to do quadratic behavior in script, and I was unable to like implement or like reproduce quadratic behavior using the op-if thing. Like maybe we can put this blog post someone wrote in the notes, but basically there has been an op-if quadratic behavior and an op-roll quadratic behavior. We talked about that last script meeting. And the op-roll, we can't do that in Bitcoin.Cash because we have the clean stack rule. So op-roll just pushes, I think 10,000, or no, 1,000, 1,000 items on the stack, and then rolls them over and over again, which is very slow. But we can't do that in Bitcoin script because the stack will be full after execution, which will be an invalid transaction. The op-if, however, it is possible to do that on Bitcoin script, and it is relatively costly to execute, but it doesn't scale quadratically. So if we just increase the number of opcodes, it scales sublinearly. So if we have like an opcode limit of 4,000 or something, then it takes maybe 2 times, despite being 20 times the number of opcodes. And other than that, I wasn't able to find any quadratic behavior. There are some expensive scripts like with hashing over and over again, but those are obviously linear in behavior, at least if we only change that number. Yeah, so, and it seemed to me that the only way we could realistically raise the opcode limit is that we limit it to only raising it for pay to script hash inputs, because otherwise it will be easy to construct DOS attacks, even if we get like the stuff Mark is working on.
Maybe I just realized in my intro I didn't really say what the criteria and stuff was. I kind of said that it was there, so maybe I should mention that. Kind of like just stepping back to the high level, like I think that like what I wrote down in the thing is the criteria is basically like stuff that like we want to have a simple script language that is enabling like, you know, the main function of Bitcoin Cash, which is peer-to-peer electronic cash. So it's basically like imposes spending conditions on there. So, and it should be like some generic thing. Like we don't want some kind of complicated, like a good example is opcode. It does a lot of complicated things and it's very specialized function. Like that's not, we don't want to like add things like that if possible, unless there's like a super, super important use case for it, I guess. But in general, like it should be a language that can be, you know, that it is composed of like interchangeable parts that can be put together, like any language. So I guess for me, like things that fill gaps that are obvious, like that's why I think reverse op roll is there's probably something that should be in there, because there's like all these other script manipulation opcodes. There's like 20 of them or something, and there's all kinds of weird ones in there, but like that's like one that's obviously missing for some reason. I don't know why. And for the compilers, it seems like that's something that's like a known, like if you have that, it's a known thing that can make your scripts way more efficient. Stuff like increasing the limits, like the opcode limits and stuff, I think that's more of a stretch, because I think it's less obvious whether that really, like it's more complicated for one thing, and it's also less obvious whether that really, you know, fits, like goes after the main goal of Bitcoin Cash. Like, I don't know, maybe it does or maybe it doesn't, but I think it would need to be like looked into more. Yeah, and then there's a bunch that are in between, like the op push state thing, which seems like a good idea, but it's also like a pretty major thing. So yeah, I guess that's kind of where I like rank the different things. But that's just my opinion, so I don't know if other people.
Yeah, I think the script size limit is one of the harder parts for script developers to run into, because it's almost like you can't really work around the script limit. You can work around the like OP reverse roll or OP like reverse bytes, but once you hit the 200 limit and you tried every kind of optimization, you are more or less at a loss. So I think that the opcode limit should be looked into, especially if it doesn't like change incentives.
Yeah, and if we're talking about like these general solutions, like you mentioned, Antony, then yeah, like this larger numbers and larger limits, those would appear to be like some of the most general items on the roadmap, at least.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I can't help but comment on this double fisting. Is this a German thing? Two mugs at once?
I accidentally made 2 T's and now I want to show off. Yeah.
Okay, so you're showing off. Okay, good.
So yeah, I pretty much said all I wanted to say about this. So unless anyone else has more feedback, I think that pretty much covers it.
I was also wondering about limiting not maybe opcodes, but stack height. I believe there is some limit in this currently, but maybe lowering this limit could prevent the quadratic behavior well enough.
Yeah, this would be the case for the OP reverse roll attack, which, as I previously said, is not possible in Bitcoin Cash, but I'm sure there are other quadratic attacks that we don't know of. Maybe there aren't, but shouldn't assume it. And the stack height of 1000 is like ridiculously high. I think I never ran over 30 or something. But yeah, we shouldn't lower it if there isn't, in my opinion, a reasonable concern that it might be malicious. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Of the limits we have, that's one that's exceptionally high for no apparent reason.
Well, my main concern is keeping the script language somewhat consistent. Well, it's not really consistent already, but we don't have to make it worse. We can maybe avoid that. And second, I want to avoid a kind of tragedy of the commons situation where we create scripts that are more and more expensive to validate, and everybody has to validate them, and then things get bad for everybody essentially, right? So those are my concerns. But besides that, I don't have much to add here.
And what do you think about limiting the increased opcode limit to pay to script hash only?
I don't think that much about it, to be honest. We should really make sure that the quadratic behavior are not exploitable if we do that. But beside that, it really depends on the side. Like we need to. Okay, so basically, here is what I would look at to know. If I would be for a value or not. That would get how much more expensive it gets and what kind of use case you get out of that, right? And then obviously there is a subjectivity aspect to that, but then we need to decide is what we get out of that worth the extra cost on the ecosystem or not. And debate that, but first step in the debate would be to gather that data.
Okay, yeah, because I did gather some data, and it seems like the OPIF isn't quadratic, but the hashing can be quite expensive to validate. We also have to take into account that if we have a larger transaction size, then the fee will be higher, and then people will what you call the tragedy of the commons. If people pay for the increased validation costs, then usually it's fine, more of a gas cost. Do you think the tragedy of the commons still applies if the transaction gets
Yeah, because basically everybody needs to validate those scripts, or everybody that needs to run a node for whatever reason, right? But only one person get paid. And if I'm providing a business or whatever that need to index the exchange for some reason, like most business that interact with crypto need to do that, suddenly it's more expensive for me to run my node, and I'm not getting any fee out of that, right? So I see fee more as a spam prevention measure kind of thing, more than actually a way to pay for the resources that are consumed. Because clearly the people that are spending the resources are not the one that's paid the fee consume them, but a bunch of other people also don't get the fee but consume those resources as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, but that's more or less intrinsic to the way Bitcoin Cash is designed. So, in Ethereum, we have a similar mechanism where just one guy gets the transaction, the gas costs, but they have a much smaller block time, so it's more spread out, I guess, between miners.
So we're still on the roadmap, correct?
Well, I think it seems like we're kind of running out of stuff to say about it, so maybe we should move on.
Well, I could give an update on OP reverse bytes, which
That's the next item, so please go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I've been also working on OP reverse bytes, doing an implementation, which then the ABC team, especially Amaury, gave good feedback on. And so there's basically two parts to it. One part is the implementation of the opcode and the testing of the opcode. And the other part is the activation logic and the testing of the activation logic. The first part seems to be almost finished, so it still has to pass one more review. But after that, I think it can be added to the code. What's still missing is the activation logic for the next hard fork. The implementation of the activation logic is very easy. I think it's just 4 lines or something. But the testing is like, I struggled a bit with writing tests because the testing system between OP check data sig, which I based my implementation on, like is very outdated and doesn't work. And I wasn't able to use any of the other tests to do the activation logic. So for the yeah, maybe someone can help me redirect to some people who know how to write like activation tests, functional activation tests for the opcode.
Yeah, we can do that, but one thing that you can do is grab through the history, because we did similar stuff on almost every upgrade, and the test, you know, end up looking somewhat similar always. Well, obviously the feature in the test is different, right? But basically the test is like, you try to use the feature before the activation, and have you verify that it doesn't work, and then you activate and you verify that it works after activation. Then you roll back, you know, like you do a reorg, and you verify that the reorg, you know, happened the way you expect it to happen. You know, this kind of stuff. And so even though the feature part of the test ends up being different every time, the whole general structure of the test is very similar.
Hey, do you have any like keywords that I should look out for when searching through the history?
So usually those are going to be Python tests, so they are in test functional. And you know, if you,
but probably in the Git history later back.
Yeah. So if you do like a git logs -p on that folder, and you grab for activation in there, you're gonna find interesting stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, well, like, one comment I'd make is that I wouldn't base it on check data sig is a bit too old. I think the test was improved after that. So like the last one, I guess, was Mark's Schnorr multisig. I can help you find the relevant commits if you want.
Yeah, that would be very, very helpful, because the object data sig was like, it imported stuff that doesn't exist anymore. So that was.
Yeah, no, the more recent ones are better to base it off of, because the tests they also have better. It changed a little bit. Like it's a bit more of a complete test now.
Yeah,
so I can help you with that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so the name will be op reverse bytes now, and if anybody wants to change the name, they're free to reorg the chain.
Well, I mean, the name is not really. I guess the name's not really a consensus thing, but yeah.
Yeah, that was part of the
people
joke.
could call it whatever they want, technically.
Should we move on to the next item then?
Yeah.
This is Mitra. Am I pronouncing it right? Is it Mitra?
I just go for the simplest pronunciation, which is Mitra. Yeah.
Mitra is good. Explanation of the main features of the proposal, and again, the discussion from Tobias.
Okay, yeah, so the idea behind Mitra is to allow basically some of the cool stuff that's happening on Ethereum, on Bitcoin Cash, without like introducing some crazy stuff, and doing that in a transaction version upgrade, which we want to have anyway. because the current transaction format and hashing is kind of borked. And since upgrading the version is a big thing, we maybe want to include other changes, because if Bitcoin Cash becomes a big thing, then we might not be able to have a third transaction version. Yeah, so the idea behind Mitra are basically four components and some other things which are like already discussed. So the other things that are already discussed is signature batching, which might or might not be useful. The localized abstract syntax tree, and fractional satoshis, which we would likely want to have in a new transaction version. And the things I wrote about in a blog post recently were a new script system, an entirely new script system called cache assembly, which will be roughly based on WebAssembly. Amaury and I shared some thoughts how we could improve on WebAssembly so it fits better on Bitcoin Cash. The next part is the input constraints, where you basically say, okay, this input not only has to have this certain out point, but it also has to have like a certain block height or block hash or a preamble, which allows some cool stuff like casinos. And combined with the preamble, it allows tokens. Since with the preamble you can do basically this. The preamble is a additional constraint on the whole transaction, which basically says, okay, this transaction can be valid, but if this preamble is invalid, then the whole transaction will be invalid. Basically, a small program that double checks the transaction. And combined with that, we can do basically a recursive proof that all previous transactions must have been a valid token transaction, which allows us to add tokens without having some complicated token scheme that's like tailor-made for tokens, but which has a general system. Then the next item that the last item I put in a blog post is a carryover, which is a very simple thing. It's just like an additional part of an output, and this like byte string, maybe 32 bytes or something, and this byte string has to be present in the input that's trying to spend the output, which then allows some very simple state transfer between transactions. Yeah, and all of those things that I just described, they like collectively they're all a big thing, but individually they aren't very huge changes. Probably cache assembly and preambles are the biggest change, but other than that, they are aren't deviating from the idea of Bitcoin Cash, at least the structure of the transaction, too far. So in my opinion, I think it's a step in the right direction if we get the proper data for that.
Questions for Tobias?
I have one question about carryover. That's the most interesting part for me. So you designed it as a additional field in the transaction output, right?
Yeah.
Did you consider another approach in which there would be an opcode in cache assembly that pushes some kind of carryover? In that way, we could have different carryover bytes in various script branches. So depending how you spend an output, you would have a different message.
Yeah, this is how we currently do state transitioning between contracts. So Rosco wrote about this in his post about Ethereum versus Bitcoin Cash contracts. And there we basically just use the push opcodes to do state transfer, which is basically what you're saying, I think. The drawback of that is that you basically have to like fiddle together the script in a certain way, so it pushes the state at the correct position, and the carryover would basically be like, okay, let's separate this into a separate thing, so we don't have to do some meta programming magic to get the script hash right. Does that make sense?
Well, for sure it's easier, maybe, but I'm not sure how useful it would be without this. I think I will just think more about it.
Yeah, I think the carryover is one of the least like fundamental and least like if you like and probably easiest to implement. And if you don't have it, then it'll still all the things I'm thinking about will still be possible. It'll just be easier for new developers to be like, oh yeah, I can do state transition very easily with that field.
Okay, is there any other questions or discussion regarding the main features of the proposal?
I guess I would just ask, like overall, like how would you see this happening, like in practice? Like it sounds like it's just one. It sounds kind of like you're thinking of it as one big package kind of thing. Which, and I guess my question is like, is there like could it be done incrementally somehow, like the different parts of it, or yeah, I guess that's the question.
So it would be very much preferred for me if it would be possible to do it incrementally. The problem, so to speak, is that all of the features are more or less like constraints. So they limit what you can do with the transaction. So it would always be basically a soft fork. So currently what we're doing in Bitcoin Cash, we're always increasing the spendability of things. And if we're like, okay, let's add the preamble, then we'll have an additional field, and that will, if parsed correctly and executed correctly, then it will say, okay, this transaction is no longer valid. Before it might have been valid if the preamble would be ignored. But we could just like accept that and be like, okay, if the preamble is empty, then you, like before we add the preamble in a fork, if the preamble is empty, then it's spendable. But if it contains something, anything, then it will be invalid. And once we agreed upon the syntax of the preamble, then we can add it without having this soft fork problem where some wallets might consider a transaction valid, whereas it actually is invalid. Yeah, and that means we have to add some empty fields and we have to be a bit predictive about the things we would want to add and add a placeholder. But we would be able to add new things. Unfortunately, if Mitra wallets then want to use these features, they have to upgrade with each new like hard fork. So it would probably be smarter to delay the activation of new features until we have like a whole batch of things. So wallets don't have to implement them like every few months. but I'm not sure about that. Maybe it's easier for wallets to implement one small thing every 6 months, instead of 5 medium-sized things every 2 years. Maybe anyone has some experience on how that works in practice.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess just looking at how things are going now, it feels like this is a pretty major change. So that's just my concern. Seems like a lot to change. It's hard enough just to like get the little changes in that we're doing now. But I don't know. I mean, it's not, a lot of them sound like good ideas, but I was just trying to think about like how it would actually work in practice, basically.
Yeah, so I think one thing we should do is get a testnet just specifically for Mitra, so people can start building things that would be that we could have. Yeah, all the things I wrote in the blog post, which might be possible with Mitra, to test if they actually do work the way I wrote about it. And I think I would be able to get some funding for implementing a testnet. And then once the testnet is fleshed out, more or less, then we could integrate some of the parts of that. But I do agree that given that it's already relatively hard to integrate OP reverse bytes, then it would probably be even harder to integrate something like cache scripts into Bitcoin.Cash. But I think some of the parts are like the script system is very like it has a lot of parts which are a bit like not good, and as Amaury said, it's a bit inconsistent, and having a consistent system that can be used for developers in the future will be, I think, very, very important. And considering all the competition that's rising in the smart contract world, I think it would give Bitcoin.Cash some more like intrinsic value. And I think there might be people who are very supportive of that idea, if that makes sense, and would maybe be willing to fund that. Yeah, did I answer them in a good way, or do you think that's still like bit like not clear what I'm thinking about that?
Well, I don't know. I just have a lot of unanswered questions, basically. Like, I don't know. Like, it just seems like a major change, and it would involve, like, if wallets are going to use it, and so on. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's hard. I just haven't wrapped my head around it, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way I see it is that we're going to need a new transaction format at some point anyway. And because this is going to require some patch in various wallets or library or whatever, the way I would do it is just like bundle all of that together. Like new transaction format, new script system, new everything all at once. And then we can ship libraries and stuff in various languages, and people can integrate that. Because otherwise they're going to have to tweak everything again and again, which is not ideal.
Yeah, so just to paraphrase what Amaury was saying, it's basically better to, like if we want to have a new thing, then we should have one larger upgrade that all wallets could just integrate, and maybe add support for some libraries, some new transaction version libraries. Then it won't be as painful as if we had one small change every couple of months.
Okay. If there's no further discussion on this, are there any other script-related topics that you guys would like to raise? We do not seem to have any questions from the audience. So if there's no further business in this meeting, I'm going to suggest we terminate.
Sure.
Adjourn.
So I'd like to thank you all for attending, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.